The day I inherited 2,300 acres of farmland, I didn't expect my life to change overnight, but it did. I opened the lawyer's letter with the usual mix of curiosity and skepticism. Most inheritances are small, sentimental things, an old house, a trinket, maybe a savings account. But at 300 acres, that's a game changer. The farmland stretched further than I could see, rolling gently under the sun, dotted with ponds, barns, and grazing cows. And I quickly learned something that made my jaw drop. The entire local HOA sat on my land. Every single property, road, and community amenity. They had been there for years, oblivious to the fact that someone else owned the dirt beneath their feet. I remember standing on the edge of the pasture, the wind tugging at my hair, feeling both exhilarated and terrified. On one hand, this was a dream, endless land, cows, and freedom. On the other, the thought of dealing with an HOA, a group of people used to wielding rules like weapons, made my stomach churn. How had this happened? How had nobody thought to check the property deeds? The HOA members were polite at first. They assumed I was some distant relative who wanted to keep things friendly. They didn't realize I had a different plan. After a week of paperwork, lawyers, and staring at maps that looked like miniature cities sprawled across my property, I made a decision. I wasn't here to play nice. I wasn't here to negotiate sweetheart deals or hand out discounts. I was here to take control of my land, and I was about to make them pay for the privilege of using it. I sent the letter that would change everything. Overnight, their rent tripled. Every member received an official notice, beautifully typeset, citing property rights, land use regulations, and a clear new fee schedule. The shock was immediate. I could almost hear the gasps as they read it. Some called me frantically, others came to my property, demanding explanations. I stayed calm, sipping coffee on my porch, watching the cows graze, feeling a surge of satisfaction. I had never imagined myself as the landlord of an entire community. Yet here I was, wielding authority I hadn't expected but fully deserved. The reactions were priceless. Some were furious, some were pleading, and a few just froze, staring at the letter like it had burned them. Social dynamics shifted instantly. Power had a new owner, and it was me. That feeling, the one that comes when you realize you flipped the script on people who thought they were untouchable, is addictive. But the real fun hadn't even started. I was just getting warmed up. By the next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing like a hive disturbed. Texts, emails, and even hand-delivered notes flooded in from the HOA members. Some were frantic, some furious, and a few tried to charm me with awkward smiles and vague promises. "Surely there's been a mistake," one elderly man insisted, waving a coffee-stained document like a flag of surrender. I smiled politely, nodding, as if I hadn't just tripled their rent overnight. I decided to take a walk through my land, my boots crunching on the gravel paths that, until a week ago, they had assumed belonged to them. Every house, every street, every patch of grass, they were all on my property. I realized then just how absurdly long this had gone unnoticed. They had treated my land like it was theirs for decades, mowing lawns, planting flower beds, and hosting barbecues, never once asking permission. It was like inheriting a kingdom whose subjects had been running, amok without a king or queen. The first confrontation came from Mrs. Kessler, a woman whose HOA status practically screamed control. Freak! She appeared at my gate, arms crossed, a glare that could burn holes through steel. "This is outrageous," she declared. "We've lived here for 20 years. You can't just—" I cut her off with a calm, almost soothing tone. "Actually, I can. And I just did." Her face turned pale as she read the official notice again, and I could see her mind racing, trying to calculate the new rent on her tiny property. Word spread fast. Within hours, a small crowd of HOA members gathered. Some bold, some trembling, all unified by panic. They tried to organize meetings, petition signatures, and even threats of lawsuits. I listened from my porch, arms folded, occasionally shaking my head with exaggerated sympathy. Their protests were like background noise to me, harmless at worst and entertaining at best. The irony wasn't lost on me. These were people who had enforced fines for a crooked fence or a miscolored mailbox, now suddenly powerless under my rules. Meanwhile, the cows, my cows, seemed to sense the tension. They grazed lazily, oblivious to the human chaos erupting across their fields. That's when inspiration struck. If they thought I was just a new landlord, I could show them I had more than legal power. I had the element of surprise. I started planning little reminders that would make the HOA members think twice before taking liberties on my land again. The first idea was simple, mischievous, and perfect. A little photobombing with heavy machinery. But I knew I needed to wait for the right moment to strike. The opportunity arrived on a bright Saturday afternoon. The kind of day people used for picnics and selfies. I was repairing a fence near the south pasture when I noticed a shiny SUV parked far too close to my cows. Out hopped Karen's daughter, phone already raised, posing dramatically with my grazing, heard like they were props in her personal photo shoot. She laughed, changed angles, and ignored the clearly posted signs about livestock areas. I watched from a distance, equal parts amused and irritated. I remembered every HOA warning letter they'd sent neighbors over the years. Grass too tall, decorations too festive, trash cans out 5 minutes late. Rules were sacred to them until the land belonged to someone else. So I climbed into my tractor, the one fitted with a very noticeable manure loader, and eased it into gear. No yelling, no confrontation, just timing. As she lined up another selfie, I drove slowly behind the cows, keeping everything safe and controlled. The loader rose into frame like an uninvited celebrity guest. I paused, smiled, and waved. Click, another. Photo. Click. Each shot captured her perfect. Pose contrasted with a massive, unmistakable farm tool filled with yesterday's reality. She finally noticed, spun around, and froze in disbelief. She stormed over, demanding I move, claiming I was ruining her. Pictures. I calmly told her she was standing on private agricultural land and interfering with normal operations. Her confidence collapsed instantly. She left in a huff, tires kicking dust. Dignity bruised worse than her Instagram feed. I didn't say another word. By evening, the HOA group chat exploded. Screenshots circulated. Complaints flew. Accusations of harassment, unprofessionalism, and abuse of power filled my inbox. I replied once, attaching the land map, the lease terms, and a reminder about trespassing policies. Silence followed, thick and satisfying. What they didn't realize was that the photo had already escaped. Someone shared it online, and neighbors outside the HOA loved it. Comments poured in, praising the poetic justice. Even a few HOA members privately messaged apologies, suddenly eager to renegotiate. Standing in the pasture at sunset, cows lowing softly, I felt something shift. This wasn't just about rent anymore. It was about boundaries, respect, and reminding people that ownership matters. And I was far from finished. The next week, compliance improved dramatically. Lawns were quiet, meetings polite, and no one wandered near the cows again. Rent payments arrived early, questions arrived humbly, and attitudes softened fast. Power doesn't need shouting. It needs clarity and consequences. I leaned on the fence, watching order return, knowing the HOA finally understood whose land this truly was after years of unchecked HOA authority. By the start of the next week, the HOA had transformed from a buzzing hive of defiance to a cautiously respectful community. The tripled rent had been paid, grudgingly at first and then on time, as if they finally understood who truly owned the land beneath their feet. I walked through my property, boots sinking slightly into the soft dirt, and I could feel the shift. Where there had once been chaos, entitlement, and smug confidence, there was now silence and an unmistakable sense of order. Meetings with the HOA became strange new experiences. Instead of the usual lectures, complaints, and petty disputes, the conversations were cautious and polite. Every question was prefaced with careful words. We just wanted to clarify, or we thought we should ask permission first. I smiled at their change in tone. It wasn't just about money. It was about recognition. After decades of living as though the land belonged to them, they were finally learning respect, and I had become the unshakable authority figure over every inch of it. Karen's daughter had long stopped taking selfies near the cows. In fact, the entire neighborhood seemed to walk on eggshells near my property. It was amusing in a quiet way. People who had once argued over minor fines were now suddenly aware that the rules applied to them too, and that consequences could be immediate, public, and unforgettable. The manure loader photobomb had become a legend. Even those who weren't directly involved had heard the story and shared it with neighbors. My cows had unwittingly become the symbols of my power. I also realized that the HOA's fear had practical benefits. Litter disappeared. Cars were parked responsibly. Lawns were maintained and noise complaints stopped. Even community events were now scheduled politely with my approval. What had started as a chaotic situation had turned into a functioning, orderly community, all under my control. The power of ownership, I realized, isn't just about property, it's about establishing boundaries, consistency, and consequences. By sunset, I often stood on the hill overlooking my acres, the cattle grazing peacefully, the quiet roads stretching below. The HOA, once oblivious, now understood. They respected my rules, my authority, and my land. And they paid for the privilege, not just in dollars, but in compliance. In the end, I hadn't just inherited land. I had inherited control, and I used it with precision, creativity, and a little theatrical flair. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about balance. About reminding people that land and respect aren't entitlements. They're privileges, earned and maintained, and sometimes enforced with a tractor, a loader, and a perfectly timed photobomb. The community would never be the same, and honestly, neither would I. My land, my cows, my rules, and now my legend. Enjoying this wild story about taking control of your land and setting the HOA straight? Hit that subscribe button to catch more outrageous real-life tales and clever landowner wins. Also, give this a like if you love the photobomb chaos and drop a comment below. What would you do if you inherited 1,300 acres with an HOA sitting on it?